This chapter previews the business cycle, unemployment, and inflation. It is an important chapter as it sets the stage for the analytical presentation in later chapters. The last word explores why many skilled jobs may be going unfulfilled. Section 1, describe the phases of the business cycle. 2, measure unemployment and explain the different types of unemployment. 3, measure inflation and distinguish between cost push and demand pull inflation. I will make one comment there that at the moment we seem to have both demand driven as well as supply driven. Explain how unanticipated inflation can redistribute real income. Explain how inflation may affect the economy's level of real output. So pretty relevant for the period of time we have going on today. Business cycles are alternating between increases and decreases in economic activity over time. Each business cycle consists of 4 phases. A peak is when the business activity reaches a temporary maximum with full employment and near capacity output. A recession is a decline in total output, income, and employment, as well as trade lasting 6 months or more. This is sometimes referred to as an economic contraction. The trough is the bottom of the recession period, and the expansion is when output and employment are recovering and expanding toward full employment level. So those 4 phases, that'd be very relevant for a future exam. Peak, recession, trough, and expansion, certainly keywords I would remember. And this is a solid visual of this as well, showing from recession to growth to expansion, etc. Economists distinguish the 4 phases. The duration and strength of each phase may vary. Additionally, individual business cycles in duration and intensity may vary. And you can see that the long-run trend is towards growth. The NBER is a nonprofit economic research organization. Within their organization is the Business Cycle Dating Committee, whose job it is to declare the start and end of recessions. They declared that the 2007 recession began December of 2007 and ended in 2009. The problem with this organization is it's more of a historical body. They're not a predictive body. So they'll just tell you once it's passed, oh yeah, that the recession happened between X date and X date, and here's where things started to get better. So they're not a predictive organization. They're more of a historical organization. Long-run economic profit in the U.S. has been interrupted by periods of instability. Uneven growth has been the pattern, with inflation often accompanying rapid growth and declines in employment and output during periods of recession and depression. Economic shocks, like we experienced with COVID, are unexpected events that individuals and firms may have trouble adjusting to. Also 2008 or 2001, other good examples. Prices can be inflexible downwards, meaning like your rent. You know, we don't have an economic crisis and your landlord just lowers their rent. Those prices are sticky. The sticky prices result in slower sales, which will cause firms to cut back on production. This causes GDP to fall. Then unemployment will fall because of the reduced demand for output, and an economic contraction will occur. Inflexible prices are thought to be a major factor in preventing the economy from adjusting quickly to economic shocks. These shocks are outlined in the next 6 slides. So causes of potential shocks can be political events, financial instability, irregular innovation, productivity changes, and monetary factors. Examples, unexpected changes in resource availability or unexpected changes in the rate of technological change can affect productivity as well. And that can be a big driver, right? And it's very nuanced because it can be many different things, and it can also be like nothing you can think of today. As the economy adjusts to political events like peace treaties or war, economic strains can occur. Rapid asset price increases or decreases can spill over to the general economy and cause booms or busts. We are seeing hints of this within the energy market today. The recession of 2007 was led by excessive money, overvalued real estate, and unsustainable mortgage debt. That's one of the big differences between 2007 and today, is the level of mortgage debt is nowhere near a level where we'd have an 08 style crisis. Most agree that the level of aggregate spending is important, especially the changes in spending on capital goods and consumer durables. As a reminder, durables are things that you can hold, touch, so think about a car, a truck, a plane, a boat, a house. Those are all consumer durables. Spending on durable good output is more volatile than non-durable and services, because spending on non-durables or services cannot be postponed. So think about a medical procedure or food. Also, durable items such as new automobiles or a new washer or dryer are generally more expensive for households to purchase. Making durable goods more vulnerable in times of declining income and uncertainty for households. One thing that's happened actually in this market is I believe over the last 5 years, washer and dryer units are 30% more expensive. But it's something that Americans buy so infrequently that when you go to buy a new washer and dryer, you don't notice the rapid increase in prices of those goods. Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the BLS, as an agency within the Department of Labor, they measure the unemployment rate, calculated by taking a random survey of 60,000 households nationwide. The population is divided into 3 groups. Group 1 consists of under the age of 16. Then if you're under 16, you're expected to be in school. That's why they exclude that group if you're under 16. And then they also exclude people who are not in the labor force. So stay-at-home mom, elderly, people who have retired, stuff like that, or stay-at-home dad. Group 3 consists of those over age 16 who are willing and able to work and are seeking work. So that would be effectively the labor force in question. 2 factors cause official unemployment rate to understate actual unemployment. Part-time workers are counted as employed. So, how deep is the labor market, right? Are we all employed but it's part-time? What's the ratio of part-time workers? And this is something they also will calculate separately. You could also be a discouraged worker, someone who wants work, but you work in a field that has gotten smaller or is no longer viable. Frictional unemployment is regarded as somewhat desirable because it indicates that there is mobility as people change or seek jobs. Frictional unemployment is usually short-term. Structural unemployment occurs when certain skills become obsolete or because of geography. That can be a long-term type of unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is caused by a recession phase of the business cycle as firms respond to insufficient demand for their goods and services. Output and employment are then reduced. So an extreme example would be, the Great Depression, and a less extreme example would be 2007, 2008, where it was much, much harder to find a job. Full employment does not mean zero unemployment, but it does mean that cyclical unemployment is near zero, meaning like anyone who wants a job can get one. It still feels like we're at full employment here, which might make it hard for the NBER we discussed in an earlier slide to actually call a recession, because we haven't seen employment come back at all. The full unemployment is equal to the total frictional and structural unemployment, because these types of unemployment are always occurring and are a natural part of the economy. The full employment rate of unemployment is also referred to as the natural rate of unemployment. This is a theoretical academic number that I would suspect changes over time. Although, I would often find it to be, in this environment, around 5%. The natural rate is achieved when labor markets are in balance. The number of job seekers equals the number of vacancies. Right now, there are about 8 times the vacancies as job seekers. The natural rate of unemployment is not fixed, but depends on the demographic makeup of the labor force. So, we'll see that number shift as, baby boomers have retired, and as people in their early 30s become the largest part of the population. GDP gap. GDP gap equals actual GDP minus its potential GDP. This could be negative or positive. We could be operating at a faster than average rate or a slower than average rate. That is effectively what this is defining. Okun's law suggests every 1% of cyclical unemployment creates a 2% GDP gap. You'll recall from Chapter 8, that's almost a heuristic, right? Doesn't mean it's true, but it means it's likely true, right? The figure shows the actual and potential real GDP and the unemployment rate from 1995 to 2015. You'll see some of those trends that were discussed in that slide before here visually. Unequal burdens of unemployment rate exists, so there are discrepancies between unemployment. One example would be teenagers, right? Teenagers have a high level of unemployment. People over the age of 16. Why do you think that is? Well, they have better stuff to do, right? They might be in the labor force, but not actively participating. Harder for a teenager to get a job places. There can also be differences with gender, discrepancies within race and ethnicity, as well as education. If you have your master's degree, you have probably the lowest percentage of ever being unemployed compared to other groups. Now, the thing about groups is they're not always accurate. If you have your master's degree in art, science, history, then maybe you do have a higher rate of unemployment than, especially compared to your peers. But generally, the more educated you are, the lower the unemployment rate for you. So this is just a breakdown of unemployment rate by year, by a variety of demographics. We won't spend too much time here. Severe unemployment is socially catastrophic as it occurs at the individual level and spreads throughout society. So some of you guys might recall, it was like that protest on Wall Street. I forget the name of it. But anyway, it was a big protest, and it happened between 2007 and 2010. Part of the reasons this protest happened is because of the high level of unemployment. People are not working. If people are working, they're busy. They don't have time to protest. It's also no coincidence that we saw, a variety of protests across the country for a variety of causes flare up during the pandemic. Less people were working. You're more likely to get civil unrest. So bad for society. Inflation is a general rise in prices over time. This is a formula for CPI. It's just the increase in a basket of goods versus the old price. So you can take a second here and look at that formula. During the last few years, we've seen a tremendous pickup in inflation. The Fed says their preferred rate of inflation is around 2%. In this environment, I think the Fed will be happy when it gets under 4%. This shows annual rates of inflation. Nice chart for it. The other thing you'll notice here is that with inflation, you'll also see, with this year's numbers kicked in, you're going to have a period like the late 70s. Hopefully, it will not be as long or as painful as that. The global perspective shows the inflation rates of 5 different countries. You can see that the U.S. Inflation rate has been generally slightly higher than the other countries. That could be because of faster growth. If you have faster growth, generally speaking, the text has not linked these topics yet, but if you have faster GDP growth, you're likely going to have greater inflation. Demand pull inflation is a result of spending increasing faster than production. So we had that during the pandemic. People's demand for boats, cars, etc. is often described as having too much spending, chasing too few goods. Cost push inflation occurs as prices rise because of the rise in per unit cost of production. Labor is more expensive, harder to get people to go back to work. So in this environment, at least, in the last 18 months, we've also had cost push inflation. In cost push inflation, prices rise, output falls. So, you have falling output along with increased demand. This is why you see people paying above MSRP for vehicles, at least as of this recording, is because of those combination of factors. As a result, the economy's supply of goods and services declines and the price level rises. Supply shocks have been the major source of cost push inflation. So certainly we're in a supply shock era. It's difficult to distinguish between the causes of inflation, although cost push will die out in a recession if spending does not only rise. Because prices for food and energy are subject to a wide variety of swings that can be temporary in nature, the BLS also reports core CPI, which excludes food and energy. The policymakers are mainly interested in whether the underlying core CPI is rising and how quickly. So they tend to exclude food and energy from their measure of inflation. But that doesn't change the impact it has on your wallet. Redistribution effects of inflation. Nominal income is unadjusted. Real income is your real income adjusted for inflation. So if you worked a job and you got paid $100,000 a year, and that year inflation was 5%, and you only got a 2% wage increase, your real income is now much lower, right? Or marginally lower, I should say, because you've lost real spending power. Prices increased by 5, and you only got an increase of 2. Harm from unanticipated inflation causes real income and wealth to be redistributed. You might see companies having to pay more for workers. That's a redistribution of income. Where the inflation to be expected, people could plan and adjust. Those expecting inflation may be able to adjust their work or spending activities to avoid or lessen the effects, but unanticipated inflation has stronger impacts. Your car breaks down. In this environment, you have to buy a new car, even a used car. You're going to get clobbered on pricing and also be hit by higher rates. Savers will be hurt more by unanticipated inflation. Why? Because they're going to lose a ton of spending power. And when I mean savings, I'm talking about people who leave money in a cash or bank account, right, that does not have a good deal of appreciation. If inflation is anticipated, these effects of inflation may be less severe, since wage and pension contracts may have inflation clauses built in. And in Social Security, you talk here about COLAs. That actually was announced this week. I think they're raising Social Security for seniors by 8.5% this year. There's always an inflation adjustment on those numbers. Union members can also benefit from inflation because of the strong labor unions can have more bargaining power in order to get the prices they think they deserve. If inflation is anticipated, individuals can plan ahead, mitigating the effects of inflation. Inflation premium is the amount that the interest rate is raised to cover the effects of anticipated inflation, which is exactly why you see the Fed raising rates today. Real interest rate is defined as a nominal rate minus inflation premium. When you look and you can invest today in like a government bond and get, 4% on it, if inflation ends up being 5%, you really didn't make any money. Maybe you just kept up. But if inflation a year from now is 2%, then, you effectively, doubled your interest rate. You got a 4% return when you could have got a 2% because of the loss of spending power. And here's just a visual breakdown of that concept. In the past, deflation has been as much of a problem as inflation. So, for example, in the 1930s or even in the 2007-2008 financial crisis. Income may rise, but fixed assets fall in value. For fixed rate mortgages, real debt declines. So, the good news is when you go through these periods of contractions, rates decline, and many people with homes can refinance at a lower rate. If you are getting a mortgage today at 7% and you can refinance a year from now at 5%, you'll lower your monthly payment by 25%. And having the cost of your home, your monthly payment drop 25% is a huge relief for many families. Cost push inflation, where resource prices unexpectedly rise, could cause both output and employment to decline. Real income then falls. You have a mild inflation, less than 3%, has certain uncertain effects. It may be healthy, be a healthy byproduct of a prospered economy, or it may have undesirable impact on the real economy. You really don't know. There's a danger of creeping inflation turning into hyperinflation, which can cause speculation, reckless spending, and more inflation. We may look back on some of the rise of cryptocurrencies during this period of low interest rates and pandemic money as the cause for all that, right? And when you take away all the easy money, all this investment into imaginary stuff, effectively disappears. Hyperinflation is obviously condemned. It's terrible because it makes prices really hard to predict, and then wages really hard to predict. It's not a good environment for planning. Prices shoot up, business owners do not know what to charge, and consumers do not know what to pay. So it creates tremendous inefficiency. One difference, though, in today's economy is that, effectively, there's a way more price discovery via the internet and technology than there might have been, even 50 years ago. It's the last slide. Great skills shortage. Job market was slow to recover after the Great Recession. Skill mismatch. One thing about the skill mismatch, if you relate it to the pandemic, is that there were plenty of people in the restaurant business who were out of work, but they were not equipped to start building new homes to create additional supply. So you had this huge labor mismatch. You can't turn a waitress into a roofer, at least not overnight. So, that when the economy shakes up and certain industries are damaged, that can be very detrimental. More job openings than people employed. Unemployed. Skills mismatch due to decrease in vocational and educational programs. Good reason for the government to potentially help retrain society in events like this. You're also seeing this take place with the CHIPS Act that was signed earlier this year. There's a huge re-education program to go along with that. Even something small locally, Bunker Hill had a program with the state where they were helping train and educate management professionals for the casino. So, that's a way government can get involved and potentially ease on some of the strains with change. So that's the end of this chapter. Thanks, guys.